given that Deep Purple in Rock was the album which broke the band internationally, it's perhaps a little surprising to find them doing just this one track from that album in their live shows at this time. Towards the autumn of 1971, they decided to start refreshing their act, so in rock tracks like Speed King and Into the Fire were pensioned off in the same way that the lengthy instrumentals like Wring That Neck had been dropped from the set when, towards the end of 1970, the band consciously moved away from playing 2-hour sets to something around the 90-minute mark instead. Child in Time, however, was a huge favourite with their audiences and had become something of an anthem. Lyrically, it just seemed to connect with the audiences at the time, whilst on an instrumental level, it had such a dynamic range that everyone in the band could push it to the absolute limit.
At the world, the bullets flying, oh, they're taking toll. If you've been bad, Lord, I bet you have. And you've not been hit, you've not been hit by flying lead. You'd better close your eyes, you'd better bow your head. Wait for the ricochet. I'm crying for you day and night.
Vocally, the track really pushed Ian Gillan, although he did quip once that wearing tight trousers helped. The cameras concentrate quite rightly on Gillan, and as he reaches the screams, it sounds like he's been saving himself just for this part, and the number really takes off. By the time of this 1972 show, the band had already undergone immense changes in style and in fortunes. The original singer and bassist, Rod Evans and Nick Simper, had been unceremoniously booted out in mid-1969. With Ian Gillan and Roger Glover on board, after a brief flirtation with orchestral pieces, the famous Concerto for Group and Orchestra, Deep Purple moved towards a much heavier rock sound, which they sprang upon the great British public in June 1970 with the release of the album Deep Purple in Rock. The album went towards the top of the charts and stayed in the British top 30 for well over a year, and those were the days when you had to sell a lot of units to make the charts. Child in Time was recorded at IBC Sound Recording Studios in November 1969 and had been the new Deep Purple's first composition, written during the rehearsals in the Hanwell Community Centre in London in July 1969. They later admitted that the riff was based upon a more up-tempo violin-led track by the American group It's a Beautiful Day. Apparently, when they first heard Child in Time, It's a Beautiful Day chose not to sue, but instead returned the compliment by taking one of Purple's tunes, Wring That Neck, and using it as the basis for a track, Don and Dewey, on their second album, Marrying Maiden. After Gillan finishes his opening verse, the song drifts into the lengthy instrumental passage dominated this time by Jon Lord, his hands filmed in close-up, fingers drifting along the keyboards. There's some brief audio interference when the band kick back in after Jon's solo, and he tries to entice Ritchie into opening up. But when he finally succeeds, the film director misses it, and it's some minutes before he changes shot. Some nights Ritchie would dominate the solos. It all depended on what sort of mood they were all in. And you can at last hear the congas, if you listen very carefully. Getting back to the song's origins, Ian Gillan described how it came about. I remember we were in the Hanwell Community Centre and I'd been listening to a great LP by a band called It's a Beautiful Day, which happened to have a song on it called Bombay Calling. One day I came back from the pub and Jon Lord was messing around with the riff of Bombay Calling, which is like Child in Time, only faster. And I thought it just sounded great, so I sat down and wrote some lyrics to go along with what Jon was doing on the keyboards. I think it's pretty obvious what the song is all about. It's just the way we felt about the world at the time. It's pretty depressing, I suppose, but then we could be miserable bastards at times. Still, I got a lot of screaming off my chest with that number. The following year we bumped into It's a Beautiful Day at an airport in America, and they said they really liked the way we'd adapted Bombay Calling. Then they said, but wait until you hear our next album. And when we got a copy, we found they'd completely ripped off our Wring That Neck track and called it something else. We could hardly complain though. I didn't realise it at the time, but I'd made a rod for my own back because it went very quickly from being a song to an Olympic event. The camera pans across the stage, catching Ian Gillan at the congas, and reaches Ritchie just in time to see the Stratocaster come whistling over his head for some furious palm bashing on the neck and a ferocious look in his eyes. track builds to its premature climax and the audience respond with applause. Then we're back into the second verse and the volume being held back until Ian gives his first scream. Notice Roger Glover holding it all together, stage left. Roger was born on the 30th of November 1945 in Wales. Whilst at primary school, he started having piano lessons from a neighbour, a retired music teacher. But when he was about 10, the Glover family finally upped sticks and moved to London, where his parents became landlords at the Richmond Arms pub in Old Brompton Road. As the family lived above the pub, Roger was able to hear and became fascinated with the skiffle groups that regularly played in the bar, and got his parents to buy him Lonnie Donegan's Cumberland Gap. By 1961, now a pupil at Harrow County Grammar School for Boys, he'd formed his first band, the Madisons, and bought his first bass guitar, a Red Hofner. On leaving school in 1963, Roger went to Hornsey Art College, but kept his bass playing up in a new group formed as members of the Madisons joined a rival school band, the Lightnings. By the spring of 1964, they'd changed their name to Episode 6. A year later, they secured a recording contract with Pi Records and turned professional, with Roger quitting art college at the same time. A musician all his working life, the only day job that Roger ever seems to have had was a summer job, cutting lawns for the local council.
Wait for the ricochet. I wanna be inside you. I'm crying.
As we've mentioned, Episode 6 recorded a number of singles over the next 4 years, but never achieved any chart success. After Gillan landed the job with Purple, Roger was invited along for a recording session with the band for a new single, Hallelujah. And despite his rather downtrodden appearance, impressed the others so much that he was also asked to join. He actually turned them down at first, guilty at the thought of leaving his old mates in the lurch, but relented the next day and accepted. Interestingly, Denmark had been important in Deep Purple's history. It was here that they played their very first live shows back in April 1968, under the name Roundabout. Don't laugh, it was almost Concrete God. Back then, they hadn't even recorded their first album, but concert promoters were happy to take a band whose pedigree included members of respected bands such as the Artwoods, the Outlaws, and Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. After that debut, the band played in Copenhagen every year, first at Club 6 in September 1969, then moving up to the KB Hallen in November 1970, and again in April 1971. The place was built as a sports centre in 1876, and the local football team still train there on a regular basis. It's also doubled as a music venue since the 60s and holds other events, including a week-long sex show every year. Child in Time belts to a close with Ian Gillan's by now customary "If You're Only 3 Foot Tall" ramble over the top, and as the song reaches its final climax, it's clear that the photographers have now beaten a hasty retreat, and the fans are right up against the front of the stage.
Hey, there you go, listen. Here's look, we got plenty of time, don't worry, we got all night, yeah. Here's something off the last album, the Farewell LP, and it's a thing which we've we've based this around something little Ian does on the drums. And the song is it's a tune called The Mule, and it's all about Lucifer and some of his friends, most of whom are sitting around tonight somewhere. Anyway, here we go. It's a thing called The Mule, this one.